G'day. Continuing on with the Gower drill grinder today, and today's episode is about these two things. It's the back block. These are how I've made them, not necessarily as the drawings do, but as usual I'll post the drawings throughout so you can see what the original's like. You can do a little bit of adaptation, but the back block and the front block, complete with a little swinging bail thing. So with these two parts complete, pretty much everything is there. All I need to do now is the bracket for the motor and the feed screw for that, and we're pretty much done. I'm going to start out with this block. Now this part we've already made, but if you look at this you can see there's a bolt-on piece there. There's a piece here which it's got a little detent arrangement there, but all that's doing is acting as a stop. Okay, that goes all the way through. On the back there are a couple of pins to run in the banjo, and a bolt for the knob. Now the knob I've already made. That was already in the small parts thing. So I was going to step through this. Now I'm not actually going to be making one of these. I'm not actually going to be making one of these, and the reason for that is that this part differs from the drawing slightly, so I'm going to be feeling my way a little bit there. But also some of the things that have been done here, nothing wrong with them, but I think there's a better way of doing it. And so I'm going to be making a few alterations here. Now the first one, I've already roughed out a block here, is that this piece here bolts on. And I think the reason for that is so that this can be threaded through and have the stop there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in from that side and then Loctite or whatever a stop in there. Put a V-groove in there, but that way I'll save myself having to make up an extra part here and bolt that on. Similarly with this little detent thing here. Now to make that, you'd set that up in a dividing head and just go along with a cutter and put in the, I think it's 18 grooves, and you can do that if you want, but my thoughts are that this is only really a locking device for keeping this screw in the one place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a lock nut on there. Now if this doesn't work I can always refit, you know, it's just a matter of tapping a couple of holes and making up a little whatchamacallit. I'll put the drawings for all the original stuff in there. But might have to make a few notes about this. Well, for such a small part, it's got a lot of holes in it. So I've got holes there and there to hold this bit on. I've got holes there and there for a couple of dowel pins to run in the groove there. And then there's a hole there that needs to be tapped for a bit of studding to put the knob on. There's an M5 tapped hole there, which I'll get to in a moment, but the next thing I want to do is put that V-notch in there. Now I'm actually going to stick that in the vise like that and bring my cutter in and do it that way. That horizontal line there is the line there, and that's the center line of that hole. So there's my part after I've milled my V-groove in there. I need to neaten that up a little bit. There's a little bit of a burr there, but that's all right for the moment. So that's all centrally located. Now, there's a screw that comes through like that, and it supports the back of the drill bit so that you can get some fine adjustment on exactly where the drill bit is. So you've got this clamped up on the banjo, and then you've got your fine adjustment. Now, here, I'm not quite sure whether this is just because my uncle's got some special taps or how it works, but that distance there is 30 millimeters. My longest tap is 25, so I can't put an M5 thread through there. So here's the cunning plan to get around that. This portion here, I've got M5. Okay, so it was drilled 4.2 and then tapped out to M5. The next section is drilled 5mm, and that provided a nice guide for the tap, so that tap is pretty much in line with the hole. The end here I've drilled with it's actually an M-size drill, so it's 7.6 something or other, I think. And what I've got is a little special nut that I've made up. Is screw that in there like that, and then with a little bit of Loctite around here, screw that down, and so I've got a force fit, but more importantly, the thread in here is going to be aligned with the thread here. So I'll put that in there, let that sit overnight, and then come off, lock that off, and I'll have two threads with a gap in the middle, but those two threads will be synchronized, so that bolt can still go back and forth in there. Right, let's recap where we got to. So this part worked out better than I thought it would, for a couple of reasons. One of the things I did when I made that plug up that screwed in, I made that a little bit too tight. Now, having that bolt through there and then using that to screw up, what that was doing was twisting the bolt, and so the two threads were in phase but only just. However, once I got that in there, let it set overnight, trim that off. I then got a bottoming tap, and the reason I used a bottoming tap is that most people only really cut with the end of those things, and so the rest of it is comparatively new. So I ran the bottoming tap in a couple of times from there and there. I also had a split die, and I ran that down the thread of the bolt, not to take anything off, but just to clear it and make sure there wasn't any gunge in there, and that now goes in there quite nicely. There's a small blemish there. When I drilled these holes, I actually had a moment and put a 4.2 there rather than a 3.3. So for an a 5 rather than M4. So I put a bit of a plug in there, used a countersink and put a little dimple in there, just enough to get through to that plug. Spot of weld, dressed that back, and I was able to re-tap that. So a bit of a salvage there, but I'm reasonably happy with that. That's okay. The dowels and thread are all in, so they fit there nicely, and the dowels are just a little bit under flush with the banjo here. I've made up a little knob, which I'll put this on here with a little bit of Loctite in a moment. But that sits there, and the head of the bolt is just under flush with that. Now the reason, or the diameter there, is enough that I can get a small socket on there and get that out. I've found that if I don't do that, I invariably run into trouble. If I do it, everything's wonderful, but it also lightens the knob up a little bit as well. I've now got a lock nut on there. So what's going to happen is that'll go in there like that, and then when I get to the spot where I want to keep that will lock that. Now this screw is only for micro adjustment of the drill, so that'll be fine for that. So if you want to make one with a clicky thing, you can. Drawings are there, but for me, that's just a little bit easier. The button on the end here, the original design, because it had the bolt-on piece there, you could turn that in one piece and then thread that in and put the things on here. I haven't done that. I've gone in from this direction because of the way I've done this, and so I've got the button, and I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on that just to glue that on, and then because this is a nice clampy bit here, clamp that up and let that set, and that'll be basically my my rear block complete. Because I know what I'm capable of when I'm not supervised properly, just as a check, I've positioned the front block, put the rear block all the way forward, and put the front block against this edge, which is where it sits. And now I've gone and scribed a line on a textured face there, just to pick up that V position, just to make sure those two V's are in line. What I'll do is I'll then set that up in the mill that out as I did for the V on the front here, only of course longer. And then trim this to size and put the appropriate bevels on there, put a couple of holes in there, all that sort of stuff. We've arrived at another one of those not going to do that moments. This is the part of the original that my uncle gave me, and a couple of things are on here that I'm going to change. Right? This part bolts onto the banjo, and that's all good, not a problem. But what he's done here is he's bolted a piece of plate on here, 6mm thick, but there's also a 1mm thick packer in there. Now, one of the things that I've been brought up on, I guess, in my career in engineering, manufacturing, all that sort of thing, is if you don't need to put a fastener in, don't put a fastener in. You know, if it's going to be permanent, you can weld it. So that's what I'm going to do. Rather than do this, I've got a piece of strap here, and I'm going to weld that on. Now, that 6mm depth there is important for stabilising this bolt. That little bail comes across and acts as a stop on the drill bit, right? So that positions where the drill bit is. So what I'm going to do instead is, instead of bolting that on, I'm going to weld that on. That's called up as 6mm on the drawing here. That's also 6mm. This is just a bit of scrap. I think it was one of these parts I made before I realised I made a mistake and made it too narrow. So it'll do double duty anyway on the same project. There's a 1mm packer there. So I'm going to, instead of putting a 1mm packer in there, I'm going to just recess that slightly, so I can mount a piece of 2 or 3mm. I'll just see what I've got on my scrap box material there, and I'll weld both of those onto the side of this bracket, and that'll give me the same thing, 6mm thick with a bit of space, and then it's just a matter of making this bail piece. And as you probably guessed, I'm going to probably change that too. I started making up the bail piece here. Now this is just a little bit of mild steel, and I've used, as I think my uncle has here, a piece of 25 by 25 by 3 angle. He's taken the corner out there. I haven't got that far yet, but I put that up there, and then I realised also when looking at this front block that I'd made, that's not actually going to clear the front of the front block. And it actually needs to. This is actually key to locating the drill consistently. And so I also noticed he's kind of put a shim in there. Cunning devil. So what I've done is, instead of using a bit of 25 by 25, I've gone to a bit of 30 by 30, and that's going to push that out 5mm, and that'll just get me to the spot I want. So just make a note of that you need to make that bigger. It's a little bit hard to see here, but there's a scribe line here. The reason this is blue is just it was a bit of angle that I had lying around the place that was blue. Came off something. So I've got a scribe line there. I'm using a parallel, and I've just got it so that scribe line is basically equal to parallel. I'm now going to come in with a milling cutter and just take that off. I mean, you can do all this with a file, of course, but that's just to get that down to the 8mm on the front, while keeping the 10 at the back here. That's the start of my bail bracket. I've drilled a 4mm hole through there and made up a little piece of stud with a 6mm diameter plus a 6mm thread, and then a little 4mm sort of spigot on the end. And the reason for that is, if I just got a 6mm bolt or something like that and put that in there, I would be perilously close to the edge there. So I've stepped that back a little bit, and actually that's even neat enough that I could, or close enough that I could do a press fit with some Loctite. But I'll do that and probably just put a little dot of weld or something on the inside there just to hold that along. Once that's all welded in, I'll round that corner off. That shoulder needs to be a nice fit in there. Just sort of so it's got smooth fit. Better you can do it, the better. This is my bail. I've just got that held in place with a nut. What I will do is put probably a mylar washer or something like that, just a thin nylon washer in here, just to give myself a little bit less grubbiness, and possibly the same on the back here. The little what's it called here, finger. Now this is made out of spring steel. Spring steel is actually code, for those not in the know, for high carbon steel, and it's basically just something that can be hardened. This one needs to be hardened and tempered, and the reason for that, of course, is just that you've got a sharp, or hopefully a sharp, high-speed steel drill bit which is going to go in there, and if it's not hardened, you might find that that's basically worn away by the drill bit. So that's all that is. Now, if you haven't got a bit of spring steel, and I was lucky, I just found a piece that I suspect actually came from my uncle again, but if you haven't got a bit of that, you could use anything that basically can harden. So some 4140, cut off thin slice off a bar of that, and you can do that. Now, the other change that I've done here is that on the original, the holes are round. Here I've actually slotted the holes, and that gives me a little bit of sideways adjustment. So rather than having shims in things, what I'm hoping I can do here is just basically have the slots. When I find a good spot, and this is a tip I picked up just recently, I'm going to put some Loctite between the two surfaces and then screw it up. And what that'll hopefully do is just basically keep that held in place. It's a little bit wonky, but I basically plunged into that with a 3mm slot drill, went along 1.5mm, skipped over 6mm from the start of that one, did the same thing there, then adjusted the dimensions to suit. So this is actually 15 wide, the drawing calls up 12. If you're not going to slot the holes, you can go for 12, but if you're going to slot the holes, you need a little bit wider. But apart from that, it's pretty standard. The other thing worth noting here, I guess, is the end of the bail. That's rounded so that can swing up like so. But I've actually taken that rear surface and taken it, so that's not actually square, it's just a little bit back. And what that means is that when this is sitting up, if you're grinding a flat drill bit, that this will actually sit over center and so stay out of the way. Just a little thing, but something that I thought, yeah, that's probably worth doing, and worth passing that one on. So what this means is I've now got the back block, the front block, and all the fittings. I still need to do a little bit of work, harden and temper that, and a few other odds and sods. But that's basically this bit. So the only bit left to do really on the grinder is the motor mount and the associated bits and pieces on that top slide. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.